All right. Welcome to the James Spearman Show. Welcome in for another awesome episode with another great guest. Each person that I bring on has a unique story, and the reason why I started this whole thing is because of all the unique people that I was meeting along my journey. So I thought it was really fun, and hopefully you find my guests interesting as well. Today, we have Erika Armstrong. I'm really grateful that she took time out to be on our show. She is a corporate and airline captain, a best-selling author of A Chick in the Cockpit, and widely recognized as LinkedIn's #1 voice in aviation. She has over 440,000 followers. Over her 25-plus year career, she's flown 28 different aircraft, served as a Boeing 727 captain, and currently leads safety training and strategic growth as VP of Business Development at Advanced Aircrew Academy. Erika, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate you taking time out to talk with me and my followers.
Oh, I'm so glad you had me, and you're the first podcaster I've seen that is doing this from the hangar. So it's so cool that I get to look at all the airplanes behind your shoulder. So great place to do it.
Yeah, it's really cool. I just thought, I could do it for my office, but why not? It would be more unique on the shop floor. So
Love it.
Awesome. Well, to kick things off, normally where I go is, what first pulled you into aviation? And did you imagine it would lead you to the cockpit of essentially like a 727?
That's a good question. And no, I never, because I found it by accident. So everybody I work with, they're all like, yeah, I was in the crib. I looked up, I saw an airplane. I wanted to be a pilot, right? Everybody wanted to be a pilot early on, but I found it by accident. I was at the University of Minnesota in the third year, not sure what I wanted to do. So I was just looking for a job that had really crummy hours. And of course, airports are open 24/7. So there was a shift open at the fixed base operator, FBO, that worked into my schedule, terrible hours. And I walked in and I took the job. I didn't know what the phonetic alphabet was, didn't know what a unicom was, knew nothing, and just got into the industry. And a lot of people are not exposed to business aviation. Everybody thinks they want to be an airline pilot, so the blinders are on for that. But I got exposed to this whole new segment of aviation and just fell in love with the characters, the sights, the sounds, the smell. And then I took a discovery flight. Back then, they would do a free discovery flight because they know that's how you get everybody addicted, is you get them that first taste of it. And I took a flight lesson and I was hooked. That was it. No turning back.
That's awesome. Yeah, it is funny. Most of the followers here are understand, what an FBO's 24/7 operation. But if you don't, there's somebody. It's almost like a hotel. You've got somebody sitting at a front desk and that's like there all night. And there's been plenty of FBOs where I had to either in front of or behind a storm and I need to wait it out, and I've actually just slept in one of their one of their spots to let it go through. So no, that's really cool. So you've flown 28 different aircraft. Do you have a favorite flying memory or a moment that defined your career?
Oh my gosh, so many, right? Those moments of terror, those moments of joy. There's so many, and every aircraft had its own specific mission, right? Because I flew air ambulance. So there are moments, especially at 2:00 in the morning, and you're getting hauled out of bed and you just don't want to go, but you know that there's somebody's life on the line. So it's definitely, motivation to get you up and out of bed. And there's a lot of key moments. I think when I look back at all those scary moments, there was one episode when I was flying at Citation out in Telluride, Colorado. If you've never been out there, it's spectacular, beautiful, but a brutal runway up on a high plateau. And I was a first officer, newer first officer, and still in that mode where you don't quite question the captain. And I'd been flying out there quite often. And one day we are going to take off and I'm flying with a new captain who I hadn't flown with before. And I ran the performance numbers and it said we were going to do a no flap takeoff. And he's like, oh, we're definitely doing a flap takeoff. And I'm like, well, these are what the numbers say. And I didn't push back enough. Long story short, we go rolling down the runway, V1, VR, he goes to rotate and the airplane won't go. And the stall horn is going off and the airplane's chirping. We cannot get in the air, but we've already gone past the point of no return. So we were committed to going. So we didn't really take off. We just went off the end of the runway and we went down into the valley. So not too many people can say they've been below the runway they took off on. But it was that moment where, first of all, thank God I'm still here. That moment taught me to always speak up. That served me really well later on when we got into the more complex crew environment. But, I'd always been studying personality types and communications in the cockpit. It was a good lesson for myself that, nothing matters except safety and keeping everybody alive. And it taught me that moment to really, I need to speak up.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And there's a lot to unpack there, really. So I'm an Air Force pilot. I fly the KC-135 for the Air Force National Guard. I've been through Air Force pilot training, and that plane, crew CRM, crew resource management is huge. And the training that they gave us when we were coming through Air Force pilot training is they showed us document or case study after case study where there was an accident and it happened only because somebody else wouldn't speak up in the cockpit. There's actually an amazing book written, I believe it's called Sky Gods, and it talks about Pan Am and kind of it goes a lot through their history, but it also talks about sky gods and where that really came from. And they're referring to at a point where pilots, particularly the aircraft commander, or there was no one questioned the captain, no matter what. And they showed us so many where in my Air Force pilot training where a whole airplane load of people would fly into a mountain and the co-pilot knew they were going to do it but didn't speak up because sky god.
Yeah.
And the Air Force, actually Pan Am, they started losing a significant amount of airplanes because of this. And Pan Am was the company that really kind of started working towards CRM. And they're like, whoa, this is not working. We are killing people left and right. And the Air Force kind of followed. The rest of the industry, I suppose, started following suit. So you're exactly right. And I'm glad you're okay too. It's being able to take that lesson, that's also a great lesson just like in life, especially, I think I'm a small business owner. A lot of lessons from the cockpit transfer over to small business or business in general, and just being able to speak up and allow your team around you to be like, hey, James, we're not doing this right, or we should probably do this, and be like, oh yeah, that's a great idea. You're totally right. I didn't see it that way. So yeah, you're exactly right. And, so the airplane went off the end of the runway and went down into a ditch, and you were able to, I suppose it just kind of came to a stop, didn't break apart.
No, well, I'll tell you right. So thankfully, we actually the deep valley. So we were flying in the valley. So airplane was fine. It's a long story.
No way.
Oh yeah.
Down into the valley, and we're able to eventually climb out.
Yeah, we were able to pick up enough airspeed then at that point to get a positive rate of climb and climb back up. But the owner of the aircraft was on board. We used to fly him out every Thursday, come back every Sunday back to Minnesota, and he had never flown with this captain before either. And before we even got up to altitude, the owner had already come up, told the captain he was fired. And because he wasn't a pilot himself, but he was fascinated with aviation. So we were discussing the situation before we took off even. And I told him my thought on it, and the captain was saying his thought. So the owner had some cursory knowledge of what was happening. And yeah, he was white as a ghost. I'll just say that much.
Yeah, for the listeners out there that have only flown GA, that's not really a factor that comes into play. You need to run your weight and balance every time you fly. But there's most GA pilots are taking off on a 5,000 foot runway or more. You could pretty much take off 3 or 4 times in a row, and the rotate speed is the same every single time, no matter the gross weight of the plane. Yeah. Where like the planes that Erika and I fly, it is a huge. You run your numbers every time, and there's been instances where, not my plane, thank God, but I've heard of stories where in the Air Force, the co-pilot normally is running all this stuff prior to taking off, and there's a computer that runs it. But yeah, I ran it a little bit off, or kind of messed it up a little bit, and where they're rotating the aircraft more than halfway down the runway or something, crazy. So food for thought. Told. All right, so Then, okay, so I want to get to this book, but before then, there was a huge gap, right? So you did corporate, and then walk me through, how did you go from that all the way to the 727?
Yeah, I got the bulk of my hours very early on because of networking. I know that's so cliche. I nag all my students about it, but truly, especially in the aviation world, it's not what you know, it's who you know. And I happened to just know the sweet old lady that walked in the door one day. I had no idea she was a pilot. She was with the Nines, and that's a group of international women pilots. Amelia Earhart was one of the founding members. At the time, they had a collaboration with the Red Cross, and we would volunteer our time, and the Red Cross would pay for the airplane. So I would go work my shift at the airport, and then I'd go put a snowmobile suit on because this is Minnesota and there's no heat in the airplane. So I put my purple snowmobile suit on and night IFR, single engine, junky airplanes to build up my hours. So I got about almost 700 hours for free from the Red Cross. I was also working at that time, I'd worked in the maintenance department and avionics and worked my way up into the charter department doing scheduling. And finally, because we had a flu outbreak, all the pilots were sick. So I finally had a chance. The chief pilot finally let me take a check ride so I could sit right seat in a King Air. And so I'll just mention this for anybody who wants to become a pilot, just one little quirky thing. So a King Air is a single pilot type certificated, yeah, that's the right word, airplane. So it only requires one pilot, but sometimes the FAA will come in into a company's operating specifications and require a second crew member. So this charter company had that situation, so I was able to log that right seat time, which is really important. So there's a lot of professional development programs second in command a Part 135 company can have, and that's how I started getting that twin turbine time. Once you have that, you're golden. And so from there, I actually signed a training contract. That's another thing I'd like to talk more about in the industry. We don't do enough. I know it's very controversial, but they agreed to pay for my citation type rating if I would go down to the bank and actually sign my name to the loan, and they would make all the payments as long as I stayed. So if I quit, which I eventually did, I actually had to pay to leave. But, I've worked both sides of the cockpit door, so I still think it was a win-win. I mean, I would not have been able to get a type rating otherwise. So I would love to see a little bit more outside the box thinking for getting pilots up into that next step. And then I got my type rating and the citation, and from there, it was kind of bizarre. The 135 company I was working for, I was on salary, so if I wasn't flying for them, they would sell me to other flight departments. So that's actually where my fascination came from, learning about company culture and safety culture and how that is a factor in the entire operation of a flight department. Because I would walk into all these strange flight departments, sight unseen, walk in the door, and I would instantly have to fly with a captain who I'd never met before. And trying to understand, how they do their process of procedures and their thought process, it was fascinating. At the time, I wasn't really thrilled with having to do it, but it taught me so much when you're trying to explain safety and what that looks like. And the charter company I worked for, they had 2 fatal accidents while I was working there. So
Wow.
these were, experienced pilots. And so I've always been intrigued with the pilot brain, how you train somebody, how you train them better, faster, and to have better thought processes, especially during emergency situations. So that laid the foundation.
Yeah. And so that kind of takes us into your experience working right now with Aircrew Academy, right? Advanced. Talk to me about what you're doing with them and the safety related items working with them.
Yeah, so one of the things that's technology has changed everything, right? Automation has made aviation exponentially safer. Just having that level of automation so that you can, do more tasks at one time is just incredible. So one of the things that's changed is now e-learning and all the other ways of keeping pilots current. So in the olden days, we would have to pull somebody off for recurrent training, pull them off the line, bring them in for 40 hours. And yeah, I still remember like the chief pilot of some of the charter companies I worked for, our recurrent training was they would open up the FAR-AIM and read it to us, or they'd open up the GOM or the operating specifications and they would just read it. So the industry has gotten much better, especially going from rote memorization, which doesn't help you at all during an emergency, to actually putting a little bit more scenario-based training in, making pilots on the ground while you're safely able to talk through an emergency. So, I used to teach at the university here, Metropolitan State University, and it's a burden on the instructor or the teacher because you're having to correct tests that are written and short answer essays and that kind of thing. But it's a much better way of demonstrating your knowledge is to put somebody in a position instead of saying, how does an alternator work? I am going to put you in the airplane and say, okay, you've got a low voltage light on. Tell me what it could be. Tell me what would happen. Tell me how different it would be if you were IFR, and make that pilot go down all those other dark pathways and get their brain thinking their way through, because we can't train for everything. There's too many variables. So we're having to train that pilot brain thought process instead of individual actions and reactions.
Yeah, so the Air Force calls those tabletops, and that right off the bat, they they start hitting you with those, and they give you what you would have in the cockpit, right? Your checklist and any other source materials. You can't have like the full dash one, which we call the entire aircraft manual, the dash one. But you've got your expanded checklist that you would have while you're actually flying. Nowadays, we've got iPads, but you would stand at the table and he'd say, all right, here's the condition, here's the situation. You're flying the T6 Texan and you're at 15,000 feet and you get a chip light. You have the aircraft. And then we have to go through, we're like, okay, well, they call it the MATL. I'm going to jack it up now that I'm put on the spot, but it was like, okay, maintain aircraft control, analyze the situation, take appropriate crew coordinated action, which is for the tanker, and land as soon as practicable. And then, if you mess that up, you'd have to restart, but you'd sit down and you're like, okay, so I've maintained aircraft control. Do I see anything else? And then the instructor's sitting there. He's like, no, he's just like making it up as it goes, this scenario. And he does. He drives it all the way. You drive the scenario all the way to the ground until you're landed. And you're like, well, have I rectified, And then when you landed safely, the exercise is over.
Yeah. Well, what we need pilots to be able to visualize it, because we can't, even given the example of spin training. When I was learning how to fly, we actually spun the airplane as student pilots did, but we lost so many people. I actually lost a friend to a spin training accident. So the FAA came in and said, hey, we want you to recognize a stall and not get into it, right? That's, in the real world, we would hope that would happen, but that's not what happens. So the first time a pilot is going to spin an airplane is by themselves. But if you've at least had that pilot visualize that in their head, that brain will still have a category to go to with a response. Just yesterday, we had an aircraft crash here in just outside of Denver, and it was because the door popped open. And so we don't talk about things like that. And it sounds like such a simple thing, but in real life, the door popping open, it's just chaotic and loud and noisy, and all the papers go flying. And, people have said, well, try to slip the airplane and, try to get the door closed, blah, blah, blah. Don't do that. Yeah, it just
will not close.
It won't close. So fly the airplane. But, we talk like that, but we don't actually let that pilot visualize. Let's really think about what a popped door would look like. So just for an example, try to shift the way that we train pilots. I like that philosophy much better.
Yeah, there's, for anyone out there, especially with GA, I mean, it's not as common in larger aircraft because that's going to get checked multiple times. The latching mechanisms are much more robust, but in a GA airplane, what kind of plane were they flying?
They were in a Baron.
Yeah, so especially the Beechcraft doors, they're normally a pain in the rear end to get closed. I don't know if you've got time in an A36 or G36 or G58, you know exactly what I'm talking about. That door is a major pain, and you gotta there is a way to do it, okay? And normally if a customer buys a A36 or a Bonanza or a Baron, I have to go through training with them. I'm like, okay, this is how you close the door. Make sure the handle, is at 90 degrees. Then try close. And normally they're out there just wham, slamming it over and over and over and over. I'm like, whoa, stop. But yeah, so for anyone listening out there, if you haven't had this happen to you, if the door pops open on the takeoff roll, you might as well just, go up to pattern altitude, bring it around, land, and then close it. The air pressure moving over the door creates a suction. So it's literally impossible to close that door. You'll break the handle off trying to get it closed. I've never been able to successfully do it. There's been times where I was really in a hurry. I was like, okay, I'll just worry about this door once we get up in cruise.
No.
It didn't matter. It's never going to close. How about you? Have you had any success closing the door in flight?
Nope, had to go. I had the first time it ever happened. Actually, I was doing a phase check in an old Beechcraft Sport, and the chief pilot actually didn't close it tight. And it was so good though that it happened with him. And he's like, duh, he's the one that made this mistake. But it was, yeah, we lost all the sectional charts, and it's just loud and noisy. And unfortunately, there's a couple airplanes you might be able to do it. There's often a little side window, and if you open that up, it might relieve the pressure.
Leverage.
But I hate to tell pilots that because I don't want them to divert their attention from just flying and just getting it back on the ground. So, yeah, I've had it 3 times.
Take your go around.
Yep. Yeah, exactly.
And then fix it.
Yep.
Now that's awesome. And so in these safety programs, what other tools are you using? Is it mostly tabletop, or are you using other tools to kind of breathe this into it?
Yeah, so Advanced Aircrew Academy does a couple things. The bulk of what we do is we do e-learning modules. So we've got about 120 different topics. We're adding something new as the industry requests it, like safety management systems. It's been a requirement. It's been mandatory for the airlines for several years. It's just became it's an obligation now for Part 135. They have until May of 2027 to have a safety management system. So helping flight departments put those together along with all their initial, their recurrent. We have worldwide international procedures training, and that's always changing. And then we attend all of the conferences across the country, all the safety conferences, and we put on safety workshops and help with all of those. So because I'm so fascinated with pilot personality and how that affects decision making, that's been my stomping ground, is doing a presentation on the pilot brain, and another one about training past the mistake, what's actually happening to your brain after you made a mistake. You're in that startle moment. And so going to safety workshops across the country and doing talks and having some fun with training.
That's interesting. Talk to me about that, how your brain reacts after you make a mistake.
Well, so it's different for everybody. And pilots have a very specific personality. There's a very specific personality that's drawn into the airline industry. We can talk for 8 hours just on that. But the superpower of a pilot is also their detriment during a startle effect. So one of the skills of a pilot is to be able to draw in multiple sources of information at one time and have one output. You've got your hand on the yoke, you've got your hand on the stick. But if you think about what you're taking in, even during like an instrument approach, there's not a lot of people that could do that. You're taking in your airspeed, your configuration, you're talking to air traffic control, you're talking to your crew members, your attitude above or below the glide slope, left or right of glide slope. You're all doing all of these things. But if you have an emergency in that moment during that startle, because you're human too, all of a sudden you've got tunnel vision. And so the superpower of a pilot is instantly taken away in a startle. And if you're not aware of your own startle effect, it now eliminates your ability to take in all those details of information that are coming in. So trying to train pilots early on in their career to pay attention how they startle and how to get yourself out of it really quickly. We are all born with a certain level of a startle effect. So you can take a brand new baby and everybody has a startle. Some are worse than others, and you can actually blame your parents for it because about 70% of your startle is based on your parents. It's a hereditary thing, actually, but you can train yourself on being aware of it and getting yourself out of it. So it's much more complex than that, but that's just kind of a cursory overview of what that looks like.
Yeah, no, this is fascinating to me because I've never heard what you're describing. That's not a very commonly taught idea. So this is very interesting. What it takes me to is kind of like altitude chamber training, so you can identify like your symptoms of when you begin to experience altitude sickness. If you're up above 10,000 feet and what it is, what are your symptoms, so you can be like, oh, okay, I needed to do something about this. What are the typical symptoms for pilots out there listening of that? And I would say, what are the symptoms? And then is it possible to me, it sounds impossible. They get worked up. How do you work it back?
Yeah, the startle effect. All right, but so I just want to quickly say something funny because you mentioned the altitude chamber and pilot's ego. So the first time I ever went into the altitude chamber, I went in with the chief pilot, and we're smack talking each other about who's going to last longer than the other one because he's like, I ride mountain bikes, blah blah blah, and he's very serious. He didn't smile a lot, didn't make any jokes, but he went first in the altitude chamber, and there's a nurse in there, and we're doing simple things. We're doing math problems, and the nurse is coming around and just asking you questions, and she asked the chief pilot, she's like, okay, what's 1+1, Dave? And he goes, 1+1 is 1,101. I swear I thought I was gonna die laughing, and he was dead serious. And she's like, okay, Dave, I think it's time to put your mask on. And he didn't want to do it, and he's like, I'm fine. And so I mean, they turned into this battle, and the nurses, she's seen this before, but it took two people to put a mask on. But it was such an eye-opener because he was totally unaware, of course, his own response and reaction. So it actually really does tie into that same type of ability to view yourself under a startle effect. So the easiest way to do this, to practice, is I can ask you, James, what's your favorite swear word? And you're going to say, I don't know. But the next time you say it, I want you to know you're in a startle. Even if you stub your toe, it's an example of your brain having a reaction without you actually being aware of your thought. And so if you're in the airplane, and it takes a long time to explain all this, but there's a whole variety of reasons for errors, right? It could be even something that your first officer does, makes a mistake, right? So you've got layers of things that you're trying to figure out. But that moment where you think to yourself, dang it, something's wrong, right? If a warning bell goes off or the light goes off or something, and you feel that tunnel vision going in, if you can detach from yourself and say to yourself, hey, Erika, hey, James, stop it. Have that inner voice actually start speaking to you to get the emergency started. And then tell yourself to pay attention to not what the error is, but to see what else is working. In 2 seconds, I want you to tell yourself, do I have engines? Do I have airspeed? What do you need? I mean, Sully, all he needed was airspeed, right? And a river. You need very basic things to keep that airplane in the air. So if you just apply that thought to just like Air France 447, right? Pitot tube iced over, airspeed indicators not working. They just weren't reading the body language of the airplane. They were looking at one little thing that the airplane was telling them. They were lulled into it. They started reconfiguring the airplane instead of looking at the big picture and starting off the emergency by saying, hey, we've got 2 good engines. Everything's operating in the green, then work the emergency that way. So they worked it backwards. And if we can kind of get that thought process trained in early in pilot training, you just have better thinking pilots.
Yeah. Typically you really want to, in an airplane, I always tried it, especially with indication issues. You've got at least one other thing that you would point to if you have an EGT probe that X's out or goes into the red. Typically, I would teach the customer is, okay, well, is the engine running smooth or is it running really, really rough? It's shaking. Okay, well, it's running smooth. Is there is the CHT also going into the red? No? Okay, so that's fine. Is there any other erratic instrumentation whatsoever? Typically, no. Okay, well, then I would say that this is an indication issue. Don't,
It's not your instinct. Yeah, it goes against your instinct at that moment.
Yeah. So, and what you're saying is it's kind of like, I guess what I'm hearkening it to is kind of like fight or flight kind of a mentality where your brain starts to shut down and it goes tunnel vision into one singular thing. I'll tell you as a CFI, the other thing that this brings to mind is when you have a student lock up on the controls. I don't know if you probably had that as well. When they lock up on the controls, they just become like, they just grab that yoke and they won't let go. They're just locked. It's like, well, buddy, you gotta lock. Like, you've got to let go.
Yep, there it is. Exactly. It's a great example. Yeah.
You're saying work yourself backwards out of that by just focusing on trying to slow yourself down, work yourself out. Like, okay, what do I need right now? Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Your body starts the response for you, because no matter what, you always intake a breath. You don't even realize that you're doing it, but you intake. And if you can just simply say, I'm startled, I'm serious. It's as simple as that, but that's the hardest
Just
thing.
recognizing. Okay.
Absolutely. In that moment, all of a sudden you'll see that your field of vision opens up. And if you can override your breathing for maybe just the first 5 seconds, you'll get through that moment. And that's how critical it is. And I've read so many NTSB reports where you can see that first 15 seconds will set the tone of that emergency and they can't get out of it. So if we can just interfere with that first bit of thought process, which is usually incorrect, and get that person on a different path in the very beginning, you'll have a much better outcome in general.
No, that's awesome. Yeah, especially, it's taking me back to your first story, right? Like I've been in the cockpit a ton of times where, person left seat, right seat, we're not, maybe we don't agree on something, or or the boom operator's pointing something out, and me and the other person up front, or we're like, in the 135, we have a boom operator. When we're not refueling, he sits up front. He's like a third crew member. He's keeping us honest. And so I've been in the cockpit where the two pilots sitting there arguing over it's the no, I'm pretty sure there was one specific time we were coming down final in the KC-135. I just happened to be in the jump seat, and there were two much older pilots. Typically, they're in leadership positions. They don't fly as much. They're a little bit less on top of things. But we're coming down final, and the Air Force had just released this new autopilot system for this plane. So everybody is not only like maybe not as proficient, and there's this whole new autopilot that everyone had to learn. And the autopilot on the tanker prior to this one was like you had a separated flight director from your autopilot. So you could tell the flight director to go nav or localizer or whatever, but the autopilot could still be in heading. And so, I mean, it was just a huge difference. That thing was an enigma. I only had a few years of messing with that, thank God. But the new system was completely different. It's more common. The autopilot and the flight director are one. And so our pilots that had been flying the previous model, Block 40, for decades, this is really hard for them to grasp. And so we're flying down final. I'm sitting in the jump seat, and they're arguing, why isn't the autopilot doing what they want? And they're hitting the thing, and they keep hitting the select buttons, right? Well, we're nav, we're in approach, we're in and the whole time it's off, and they're arguing with each other. You're like yelling at each other. No, I already selected that. Stop! Don't touch that. And we're just like, here we go. We are beep popping down. I'm like, guys, the autopilot is off. It's off. It's not on. Okay.
I love it. That's a perfect example.
It's just something. And, the other thing too, you said when somebody makes a mistake, but I mean, more common than not of what I've seen is it's just something different. Right. One variable outside of your normal kind of throws you off into what you would normally expect. I don't know. How do you feel about this? Most aviators that I know, especially in the Air Force, we've got like a rule of three where, three weird things are enough to just call the flight off. Like we're not going.
Yes. Well, that's what I tried to explain too, is in the simulator, because those sims are really amazing. They truly are. I mean, you totally forget you're on the ground. You walk out of there, you're just drenched in sweat, and you have that bad IFR breath, and it is amazing. But in the simulator, everything breaks cleanly. It's either it's working or not. And in the real world, things fail slowly. They fail for a little bit and come back on. So you can't train for all the variables that come with it. So it goes back to that idea of training the pilot brain. Because I taught aircraft systems and propulsion, I always feel that every failure of, every pilot error is because they didn't understand the system. It's that communication between the pilot and the airplane, and that breakdown of communication. And even your example, the airplane is probably trying to tell them, hey, dumbasses, you guys, look where we're going. You're not following where we need to be. And the airplane's trying to speak to the pilots, but, especially with the technology changes, and the next generation coming in, I know everybody complains about them, but they're much more equipped and ready to communicate with technology. My generation, we had the experience. I mean, I didn't even have GPS when I was flying. So I went through all the transition of learning technology, and that's been my resistance and having to overcome that. So it's just a different skill set for each aircraft. And as the technology changes, what you need to have in your brain to be a pilot is changing.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially when it starts to stack up. Right. That's normally probably in all the reports, it wasn't just one thing that led to the tragedy. Normally it's, oh yeah, the guy's, maybe he had, or guy or gal, right? Had some home issues going on too. Yeah. And then they came to the airport and they dealt with some maintenance things, and then also whole flight plan reroute, and then also a whole really difficult weather that they were navigating through. And once you start stacking that on top of each other, it starts to become a major issue. I had one customer, he's a good pilot. He geared up his plane, and it's just crazy to think about that would have happened to him. But when you look at the whole scenario, it was a newer airplane to him, so different aircraft, not as proficient. Then it was very challenging weather day, so that pulls. I use the term brain bites, but that starts to pull brain bites back. And then he flew into Charlotte airspace, or a very busy airspace, not in an area that he's not really familiar with too, and so dealt with the struggles of that, and then. All of that, and he also, kind of got a little bit of a talking to from that airspace, right? So he was kind of on edge, and then when he was coming back into town, there was very, very busy traffic pattern, and so all of this stacked up, and then you're kind of like, okay, I can understand why, That's why I typically have the rule of 3. Before I get off the ground, if there's like 3 really big weird things, I'm not going.
I like that rule. That's good.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so my best learning experience was actually sitting, because you were sitting in the jump seat and watching those 2 pilots. So when I was on the 727, I got hired as a flight engineer. And so, you're kind of bummed, you're not flying the airplane, everybody ignores the flight engineer back there, but it was such a great opportunity to watch all of the personalities having to work together, right? So we have SOPs and everything is supposed to be the same, but it's not. So it was so amazing to see all the combinations of personalities and how wonderful it was and how joyful it was to be with a crew that really clicked together, but how awful it was and how detrimental to safety it was to watch 2 personalities just conflict over and over and over again. It was stressful to be around that. So there's all these little weird things that you wouldn't think of that add up on those stress levels, like you were explaining, but it does interfere with a clean thought process, and you don't even recognize it in yourself, but it even starts when you get out of bed that morning. All those little layers can add up to having that moment where you forget to put the gear down. So it's hard to pay attention to.
Yeah. There's a lot to unpack. Honestly, this is probably this is the best thing we could talk about on this show, because it directly helps other aviators out there. And so I want to get to some other topics, so we're going to move on. But for the listeners out there, have a personal set of minimums, right? Like this will help also with these. For me, I've got that minimum of like, hey, 3 weird things, I'm out. You should have a minimum. Obviously you should know what the minimums are to fly for your license, but also you might step that up based off of, maybe I haven't been flying as much. So instead of, taking off in 0-0, I'm not going to do that. I might cap myself at 1,000 feet, or, I'm not going to fly into this type of airspace just because in a completely unfamiliar area. So another one that I have is, I specifically, straight out of maintenance, I don't put passengers or do cross countries straight out of maintenance. I always do a test flight first, and then, or more specifically, I do not fly IFR straight out of maintenance either. Fly straight into the weather.
That's super smart. Yeah. I learned that lesson the hard way. Flying the 727 as a new flight engineer, they send the newbies down to pull airplanes out of the C checks. And I didn't even pack an overnight bag. They're like, we're going to airline you down. You're going to grab this airplane and come back home. 4 days later, I'm still down there. I had to go to Walmart and buy underwear and a toothbrush. And
oh yeah. Always take a go bag. That's another one on your minimums list. Yeah. Personal minimums. It will save your bacon.
Yes.
Okay, so shifting gears a little bit, I think it's really cool you have a book, A Chick in the Cockpit. Talk to me about the process of just how long did it take you to get it written and then like get it published?
Yeah, I did it the old-fashioned way. There's a lot of different ways to publish your book these days. I went and got an agent, and then the agent has to pitch the publisher. It took about a year to get it written. So when I turned in the project, it was at about 117,000 words. And so the first thing the editor is going to do is say, okay, you need to bring it down to 85,000 words. So every time you chop a piece out, you have to kind of rewrite the chapters together. So writing the book is easy, and it's just like flying. Flying is actually easy. It's all the groundwork that just, washes everybody out. So what you see, the writing part is easy, but it's all the editing and the background work that goes on. It takes so long. And it takes, just to pitch an agent, it took about 8 months, because you're not supposed to pitch more than one. And so you send it to them and they wait and they decide. And then once you finally get that agent, then they start pitching to all of their publishers. And it's just a long process. So have patience if you're in the process.
Yep. I'm in the process of writing my book, and Aviation Ownership 101, Aircraft Ownership 101.
Nice.
And it's huge learning curve.
Yeah. Well, if you need help, just let me know, because you need a book. You need to pitch it. You got to have the whole, all the business plans for it. And so I'll give that all to you.
And typical, pilot human factor, right? Macho man mentality. I was like, I should be able to crank this thing out in 6 months. Yeah, that's not the case. I guess that would be overconfidence.
You need that.
Yeah, that's right. So talk to me about the book.
So I've been in the same book club, 23 years now. The same core group of women are in it. Bless their hearts. I'm so thankful for them, because when my life was out flying around in the world, and just, it's so nice to have a grounding group of people. At the end of the day, just really, that's what it's all about. So, we'd often talked about the types of books that are out there, and we were talking about aviation, and there's a lot of books out there about other women in aviation and historical fiction, people in the history, which we adore. But I wanted to bring people into a little bit more modern era and all the societal challenges that women still have. We wonder why there's not more women in the industry. I actually have a scientific reason for some of it. It would take a long time, but really like I said before, there's a specific personality that come in, and just in general, there's not as many women who have that type of personality. It's not that they can't do it. It's just that they're too smart to do it. So they're making other choices out there. So we can have a whole podcast just on that. We can talk to the science of it. But, everybody says, well, there's not as many women in it because you're gone so much. But I always say, well, look at all the flight attendants. They actually are gone more than pilots. Their duty times are a little bit longer, and they can fly more than pilots can. So that's not really the factor in it. So part of the book, and part of the reason for writing the book, is to bring the readers in, especially if you've never been into the cockpit before. I forget what it's like to not fly. So even in the beginning, when I said FBO, I just assume everybody knows what that means, right? But introducing somebody to the industry and taking them through business aviation. Everybody thinks airline pilot, so I wanted to bring in a little bit of that business aviation experience. And then just, for men and women, I know the DEI conversation has come up over the last few months, and man, it's so frustrating for the women in the industry who've worked their asses off to get there, and now they're being questioned about their skills. And, did you cut corners? My goodness, no, they did not. And so it was a great opportunity to show what it's like, and to have somebody look you in the eye. And I started flying in 1988, but back then the flight departments had no problem looking you in the eye and saying, we just don't hire women pilots. And the thing was, I was okay with it because I got it. I mean, I understood the situation. So
yes.
It's a change of perspective and generational changes. My kids are in college, and they won't think twice about seeing a woman in the cockpit. So, but having books out there like this and just making it more normalized helps the next generation.
Yeah, and it's my generation. I mean, there were several female pilots that came through when I was I went to MTSU, Middle Tennessee State University. There was female mechanics, female pilots. I've served with several female pilots at my guard base, and then when I'm deployed, being around the active duty, and you can see there's great female pilots out there. And just like everyone, right? Like there's some really crappy male ones too. There's probably some bad female ones too, but it's not because they're females, right?
Yeah, and it's not because they're male, exactly. So
Exactly. Yeah.
I just pulled the numbers up. I just pulled the numbers up the other day, and I pulled all the licensed pilots in the United States, and right now women make up about 7%. As far as the ATP, airline transport pilot level, it's about 5.5% are women. It doesn't necessarily mean they're flying for the airlines, but they at least have their ATP. So I thought it was going to be a little bit higher than that, but we're not. But because we're dealing with percentages, there's a ton of people that went and got their student pilot license and got their private license during COVID. It's amazing spike up there. So it does skew the numbers a little bit, but that's still a pretty small percentage.
Yeah, I'm surprised it's that low because, like I said, I feel like I've never been a part in an organization or a flight room where there's not a female, at least one. But I guess one for maybe every like 7 or 10, something like that. So that would, yep, that's right.
Yeah, about right.
That's right there. But yeah, actually, this past time I was deployed to the Middle East over last year in 2024. The crew that I was with, there's nothing else to do except for fly the mission. So I mean, otherwise you're just kind of sitting in your room or doing other stuff. And so we were kind of like, let's max fly. We really want to, because they've got a leaderboard too after every combat sortie. They debrief with intel and then they toss up the leaderboard, right? And it's like, that was our goal, like our only thing. We wanted to see our crew at the top of the list. But there's this other AC, most of the other people, they don't care. They just, they would, I mean, I would say most of the other crews, they were, they'd rather fly like a normal amount and take the days off and spend it in their room just watching TV. But there was this other aircraft commander. She was an aircraft commander, a young aircraft commander, active duty. That was always, and we were a guard crew. So normally guard crews are a lot more experienced, a little bit older. But this young aircraft commander, I'm not going to say her name. I wish I could, but she might not. Who knows? But she was always like, we got there fast, or we got there sooner than she did, but we were neck and neck or back and forth, 1 and 2, 1 and 2, 1 and 2. I was like, gosh, who is this girl? Like, what the heck? And she did awesome. There's also this other aircraft. There's this aircraft there while we were deployed. There's one tanker in the fleet that like everybody knows. If you say the N number or the tail flash, it's like the lemon of the KC-135 fleet. And my crew is the only one that was successfully able to like get it in the air initially. There was like, everyone kept canceling maintenance. We're like, we looked at each other, we're going to get this plane out. And so scheduling would just give us that plane because they knew we would go. All the other people would try to cancel and move to a different airplane. You know who also did it? It was that girl. That female pilot. She was crushing it. I was blown away. I was like, I gotta beat this woman. This is awesome. So, and she was an excellent aviator too.
I love it. I love that. I totally get her motivation to have those little tiny quiet victories like all the time. You know what I mean? I appreciate
she was messing with
that. Yeah.
All right. So I really appreciate you, and I appreciate the time. But we are getting on the long end, and I want to be respectful of your time. Where, if people are looking to purchase your book or they are interested in the Aircrew Academy, how can they find out? And I'll put links also.
Yeah.
Where can they get that?
The best spot to find me is if you're on LinkedIn, you can drop me a note right there. I've got all my contact information. I make it public. Erika at achickinthecockpit.com. You can ask me questions if you're looking for your first job. I work with about 500 flight departments right now, so I always hear what's open, what's closing, new launched 135 companies. So track me down. My book is available on Amazon. I did the audio book, everything. I did the Kindle. It's all out there. So, and if you want an autograph signature, just email me and I'll send you a little sticker for your books. Everybody's like, well, I read Kindle, but I can still send it to you.
That's awesome. If you're out there, honestly, the aviation industry, it's more about my personal opinion is having someone to point you in the right direction. And for myself, there's no way I would have gotten to where I did without somebody kind of steering me. towards becoming an Air Force pilot. Aviation is a very well trodden path, and you just kind of have to know if you want to be an airline pilot, there is a path that people take to do that, and you need somebody to kind of point you in that direction. Erika, I love that you're out there. I kind of view myself as like an aviation proselytizer. I just want like more people to join into the fun. So I love that you're out there and you're encouraging other females to get into aviation as well, and kind of steering them and probably, all kinds of people in the direction of how they can get to where they want to be in aviation. So I love it. And I'm going to put your links down on my site.
Oh, yeah, I'd appreciate it. It's, we glamorize it, but no doubt it's a hard journey. I mean, the reward is exponentially better than anything you can put into it. And it's hard to explain, but you really will have moments, dark moments where you're like, what am I doing? Especially when you get to about the 800-hour mark and you're like, how am I going to get to those 1,500 hours? And so anytime you need that little extra push, I'll nag you. You can email me, and if you want me to nag you every few weeks and say, are you flying? What are you doing? I'll do that for you. So just like you, we want everyone to experience the joy of aviation.
Yeah, that's awesome. What's next? What do you have coming up next?
Oh my gosh.
Erika.
Well, I'm so excited. Every year I take my girls on a big trip. And so we're going to Ireland on Friday. So
nice.
I get to ride Aer Lingus. I haven't been on them before. So nonstop out of Denver. So what a great way to go see the rest of the world as a nonstop out of here. So
that's awesome. Well, Erika, thank you so much for being on my show. Thank you for taking the time to spend with me and my listeners. I'm sure there are people that are going to listen to this and be encouraged, especially the safety side of it. That is an extremely important. Many people in GA, they do not, they rote memorized human factors. You said that earlier, rote memorization, but they don't understand and practice how that can add up. It's the FAA talks about like Swiss cheese where all the holes start aligning. And so I'm really glad that we were able to talk about that, and hopefully it makes a difference. And so I appreciate you on this video. I'll put your links to your book and your LinkedIn. Definitely follow Erika on LinkedIn. I've never seen you are crushing LinkedIn. That is awesome. So I appreciate you. And for those of our listeners, like and subscribe. We'll have another amazing guest next week. Erika, thank you for being on the show.
Oh, thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to seeing everybody out there.
Awesome. Another episode of the James Spearman Show, and happy flying.